Josephlittle, welcome to the chat show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. My
It's my
first Kriegsspiel appearance.
well. There you go. Right. What area of the world are you talking to us from?
So I am dialing in from Belgium.
Belgium. Great. Perfect. And let's talk a little bit about your wargaming past, or how did eventually all lead up to how you got to become a master umpire candidate. But we'll start from the beginning. How did you get into wargaming, and what got you interested?
Yeah, well, I think my answer is probably going to be very similar to others in the community, but I had an older brother. My
Yep.
older brother was an avid gamer. You put two and two together and you get four.
Mm-hmm.
So as the younger brother, I always looked up to my brother and the video games he would play, and started with some RTSs, right? So like Star Wars, Company of Heroes, that sort of thing.
There you go.
And through the years, I've always had an affinity for strategic games, an affinity for puzzles, an affinity for not so much the action, but the decisions and the choices that a player or someone has to make to create a favorable outcome.
Right.
And from there, from the video game world, I very randomly found myself in the wargaming world.
Okay.
So my primary kind of background before Kriegspiel was in strategic war games and board games.
What were some of your
And
favorites from those early days that lured you into strategic board games?
yeah, so there's one that is still my favorite to this day, and is one that really opened my eyes to the kind of experiences that you can have over the table,
Uh huh.
and the level of fidelity of rules that you can have to try to represent the conflict, which I think is quite crucial to a Kriegspiel game, for example, as well. Lots of parallels. Was Twilight Struggle.
Okay. Yeah.
That really opened my world, because previously, I used to play your classic tabletop games like Monopoly,
Right.
War, Risk,
Risk.
etc.
Sure.
But Twilight Struggle was the first experience that I had where I it opened this new world to me, where I realized, wow, okay, you can actually reflect real consequences, real choices, and real history
Right.
in a simulated way.
Neat. Okay. I think you mentioned Risk. I think just because it's so popular and it's seen as such a kind of a not a children's game, but an early stage game that people don't refer to it in our world, like because we're all very serious about our strategy. But really, Risk so demonstrates how you can overstretch yourself. Like there's no game that better just says you get ambitious, you get aggressive, you overstretch yourself, and watch what happens. So
Yep. Yep.
it's
Exactly.
and then Twilight Struggle just takes it to the next level. What were the elements of Twilight Struggle that really appealed to you?
Well, I think at its core, and I think that's why it's such a stark contrast to Risk, not in the game sense, but what it aims to represent. A Risk takes an abstract layer
Sure.
in how it presents war, which is fine. We do that in every game we play, including Kriegspiel.
Yeah.
But what I thought, uh, why I thought Twilight Struggle was so interesting to me and fascinating to me, is because it took a different philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
design philosophy, which was to say, okay, how can we represent the Cold War, something that's very real, complex, lots of different dynamics, into a playable mini simulation of 4 to 5 hours.
Right.
uh, and that to me opened my eyes to then ask myself, okay, well, what other conflicts can be simulated in the same way? What other dynamics, what other historical events can be simulated in the same way? And that was just a huge rabbit hole.
Right.
Still going down that rabbit hole today.
I just listened to another podcast where a Spanish designer has taken Twilight Struggle past the endpoint to into modern times because he had a similar impulse, like saying, "I just wanted to see what would happen." So
Mm,
they ended up designing a game that didn't turn out to be different, but that was the impulse, kind of take it to the next level.
hmm.
So how did you find the IKS?
Yeah, so it's a really funny story. I somehow in blessed by the YouTube algorithm gods,
Yep.
was suggested one of the after action report videos, I think by yourself actually,
Oh,
uh,
there you go.
on the Battle of Lynchburg, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, James and I collaborated on that. That was one of his games. Yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly. Um, and when I was watching that video and that after action report, I thought to myself, wait a second, these are all players. There's
Right.
no
Right.
there's no engine per se. There's no kind of NPC. There's no kind of rules that you're playing against. And that to
Yeah.
me immediately piqued my interest. It was almost like yeah, like another deeper layer of the rabbit hole just completely opened itself up. And that's how I found myself on the IKS community and the IKS Discord.
And what was your first experiences when you came in?
So that's actually interesting. I and to this day, I find myself to be a quite awful Kriegsspiel player, which
That's
is very
actually
funny.
my secret as well. I'm not
Yeah,
very good at playing it.
maybe there's parallels here.
You don't want LaFondiose on commanding a regiment. It runs around in circles and
Yeah,
has quick fires. It's crazy. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I just finished the game. I think on the weekend where I ordered a probably one of the worst charges in military history that
Right.
completely decimated my entire formation.
Yeah, when you
Totally uncalled
umpire,
for.
you sound so wise, right? Holding forth to players about, you should examine these types of tactical issues. When we're umpires, we sound so wise, but when we're
Right.
players, we're ordering terrible charges. And yeah, I get it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I think that's why I really prefer umpiring. I know some players prefer to play, of course, because it removes that level of stress
Mhm.
away from my decision making, and instead I can focus more on the simulation component and also the entertainment factor. So
Good
I'm
point.
not I'm
Yeah.
not invested in trying to win. I'm not invested in trying to beat an opponent or whatever. I'm invested in creating a good experience and in creating a realistic experience.
Talk about entertainment factors. I love that phrase. Talk about
Mm.
what do you consider in the entertainment factors?
Yeah, that's even it's a balance. For me, the entertainment factor is something that I always need to find an equilibrium with the realistic and the more traditional kind of purpose of Kriegspiel. And
Mhm.
I seem to kind of waffle between the two and bounce between the two because on one hand, I know that we do this in our free time. We are not military tacticians. We are not army officers, right? We're not getting paid for this,
Right.
or putting our lives in the risks at risk for this. And so in a way, I take a player's commitment to play as a vote of confidence that they will have a good time. You can have a good time losing, of course,
Yeah.
uh, but with that vote of confidence, I also need to balance with the fact of the traditional Kriegspiel purpose of recreating a conflict or recreating a battle or a war or whatever that is true to history and that is true to the nature of how players and how, or rather, commanders and units would behave at the time.
Right. So
So
what do you
so it's
watch
quite hard.
for? So as you're umpiring, what do you watch for to make sure the players are entertained?
Yeah, it's the first order principle there is an engagement component. So
Hmm.
there's a piece, of course, on level of interest, level of relatability with a conflict, right? That's why for me, a lot of my experience, my limited experience so far, has been in the World War II era, because we just have so much footage, or so much history, of so much things to kind of latch on your brain
Right.
to. Um, I think the second one is also feeling like you have achievable goals as a player, and that sometimes can come into conflict with the scenario design or the
Yeah.
experience you want to create, because sometimes I catch myself doing this, which sometimes can be a disservice to the player, of resolving something that you might think, well, if it's resolved this way, sure, maybe that would be the most historically accurate result, and we should always
Right.
strive for that, at least for my philosophy of Kriegspiel. But sometimes it's also, do I really want to punish this player? Do I really want to prevent them from having a good time and playing again and staying involved in the community somehow? Um,
Right.
so yeah, that for me is a constant struggle with any games I'm umpiring.
Engagement's an interesting concept. What do you look for as evidence that your player is engaged?
Well, besides your typical, active um, communicator,
Hmm.
your kind of first level of engagement. I
Right.
think the second, I think the most important is a level of curiosity. If I can sense that a player is interested in how their pieces or how the conflict or how they themselves would look, feel, and do in the scenario,
Right.
that is always a player that I want to engage with, because I think
It's
it
an excellent
shows.
point. Yeah.
Mhm.
What a good point.
Yeah, because I think it shows a level of advancement of the hobby per se, right? Because not only are they thinking about, okay, how can I win this and get personal satisfaction from executing a good strategy, but it also shows that that player is interested in recreating the history, right, and recreating
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
really interesting moments in time and in conflicts, that I think ultimately is what we're doing anyways. So.
I hadn't thought of it that way. That's an excellent point. So, for example, a question about how their guns would work, or they're really asking, how does all this work? Because I want to learn more about it. And that's an
Hmm. Yeah.
example of that curiosity.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
it's unfortunate because I do see a lot of players that take things for granted,
Right.
not maliciously, but just because I think they approach the scenario or they approach the game with the philosophy of, I'm going to try to win this game,
Hmm.
and so I'm going to try to find ways that would allow me to get to that end state, as opposed to really immersing themselves in the experience and trying to replicate, okay, what would I do if I was personally in real life in this situation.
Right. Yeah, I think they you got me thinking now. It's a great point. Players who just look at their forces, for example, as a mass of stuff, and I'm going to take
Yeah.
my massive stuff and go over there and attack that massive stuff, versus players who will say, I push out my skirmishers, I place my guns here so it better supports the attack. They're really thinking through the dimensions of what actually was happening, both back then and then how they can get a better use of their assets in the game.
Hmm.
So that's a level of engagement, I guess.
Yeah,
Huh.
and there's the human element too, right? I mean, imagine you being a commander of, I don't know, 100 men, right?
Right.
And you order a platoon or whatever, you order a few men to go assault that position, knowing full well that actually you might be sending your men to die. Um,
Hmm.
I think that piece, that gravity, let's say, uh, I think it's good when games recreate that feeling, as opposed to just, I have this block that I send over there because it's just what I'm going to do anyways.
What are ways that you create that level of engagement? That's a great point. Rather, I think several umpires point out in some of the feeds around not thinking of these as blocks, but as people, right?
Hmm.
So, what are some? Do you do that in the write ups and the resolution and the way you describe the unit? How do you try to give a little touch or look and feel on that?
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Sure,
um,
sure.
I'm a relatively new umpire,
Okay. Well,
starting to with my first game ever of Kriegspiel, being I think in February or March of this year. So I still have
right.
a lot to learn. Um, but indeed, I always have on the back of my mind, um, as a good umpire, of course, focusing on the resolution of things and the processing of things. That's kind of like the level one umpire, let's say. But I think the
Right.
level two umpire is then, okay, how can I convey these more intrinsic or more qualitative factors to the player so that they can also sink their teeth in and give me something to work with as well on my end. So we
Yeah.
both have
Right.
a more pleasant experience.
You made it. You said it. You use an interesting phrase, rules that you play against. And I thought that was a great way to talk about board games because it does feel like you have to fight your way through to find the essence of a rule set versus playing with a human being across the table. Talk about rules, which rules inspire you, kind of which rules you draw from in terms of the umpiring you're doing.
Hmm. Yeah, so I am in experimentation mode for the time being.
Sure.
um, so I have a few ongoing projects
Uh huh.
where I have taken a more, let's say, rules heavy approach, drawing heavily from a board game tradition. Uh, Mostly out of personal interest to kind of test some assumptions that I have about Kriegspiel and how players engage with this kind of content. I'm also approaching it from a very historical, or as accurate as we can get, of course, up to a limit, uh, simulation of something that's a bit more granular. For example, the classic and now famous, let's say, Atopsky system.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of approaching it from those two angles, where I'm having a lot of fun experimenting with the kind of, let's say, board game inspired rule sets, where I can be a bit more, let's say, creative,
Yeah.
versus the Otofsky system and other systems like it, of course, that allows me to really focus on the details and kind of this web of all these interconnected uh, dynamics and mechanics.
So, which periods? I'm going to get to the board games through this question. Which periods have you
Mhm.
umpired? I know World War II is your interest now. Is it always been World War II?
Mostly, yeah.
Okay.
I had a few, very few, kind of Napoleonic um, games that I've hosted. But to be
Okay.
honest, the reason why I haven't done much more outside of World War II is just because I just don't know enough about those conflicts.
Sure.
I'm painfully learning. Of course, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I'm painfully learning that my knowledge of Napoleonic conflicts uh, has leaves a lot to be desired. Let's say I
Yeah,
have a
that's
lot to
fine.
learn
It's
there.
just your interest, right?
Yeah,
It's you follow your interest, and Napoleonic didn't just didn't give you the volume that you've had in World War II, for example. So that makes
yeah,
sense. What?
exactly.
So, which World War II board games do you draw from as inspiration?
Whew. It's Did I give you the whole list or?
No, just your favorites, just to give examples of, because I think the ultimate
Hmm.
question is how do you, which parts do you bring over and which parts do you have to alter
Hmm.
based on the way we play?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, for me, the big highlights are always those games that sit at the, let's call it, operational or strategic level. So there's a few designers that I follow that I think do a great job at balancing historiosity and playability.
Uh huh.
A few of those are Mark Herman, so
Hmm.
Empire of the Sun, Pacific War, some of his titles. I really like Volko Runke, who does a lot of kind of irregular conflicts,
Yep.
counterinsurgencies, that kind of thing. And Mark Simonich as well, who does a lot of World War II operational level kind of research on very specific kind of years of a conflict or a specific operation, let's say.
It was a Mark
Um,
Simonich podcast that inspired this one.
ah,
Was
well, there
listening to
we
him
go.
talk about how he thinks about gaming. I was like, man, we need to get pre-spielers doing the same kind of conversations. It's great to hear his name. I
That's great.
agree. Fascinating guy.
Full circle then. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of
Yeah.
his.
And so, which parts make sense to bring over? And I myself adapted the Rommel rule set for some
Mm.
Kriegspiel play, so was faced with a similar kind of decisions. Which parts of these those designers' rule sets can you bring over, and which parts do you have to
Hmm.
adapt?
Yeah, it's an excellent question because I am learning the hard way now through
Hmm.
a few of my projects that there are some things that you can bring over that make sense. I
Right.
think particularly a lot of the research on let's the orders of battle, the situation, the context, right, the objectives from each side. But I'm quickly learning that the way that board games simulate conflict is so different than how we simulate in the Kriegsspiel manner.
Right.
And I think that's because in a board game, I had to do a lot of thinking, adapt my thinking on this, because in a board game, you know where you have your boundaries, you know where you have your potential actions, let's say. So nothing really feels contrived because that's what you're given. That's the tools that you have at your toolbox at your disposal to
Right.
affect a certain outcome. Whereas in a Kriegspiel, your creativity can be rewarded. Um, so it's quite hard to tell a player, sorry, you can't do that because I just didn't account for that, right?
Right.
uh, I don't have a way to process your intention, which is such a bad feeling to give.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
and I'm taking that to heart, and I'm realizing, okay, there's a lot of changes that need to happen before you adapt a board game rule set, for example.
I'm writing down the phrase "process your intention." I think that's an excellent way of framing it.
Hmm.
You know,
Oh, thank you.
because we don't anticipate some of these intentions,
Hmm.
and so when you encounter it in an order, you're like, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that."
Yeah,
So,
right. And
and the umpire says that they don't encounter that, is
yeah,
probably not telling the whole story. So,
exactly. And that's why I'm finding myself gravitating more towards conflicts that I resonate stronger with or have more knowledge of, because
yeah,
I am therefore more confident in making those assessments and processing that intention with a higher degree of certainty than one in, for example, Napoleonic, where it would be just a wild guess at
right,
sometimes.
right. So, give an example if one comes to mind of we just hadn't thought of a thing, and a player says, "This is my intention," and you're like, "Oh goodness, I hadn't even modeled that."
Yeah, I had a case in one of my um, campaign games, the Battle of Jela, where a player's unit was out of ammo, out of ammunition, and they were up against heavy armor. They were kind of up against a frontal assault by the enemy,
Right.
uh, and this player was adamant, probably to his, he was probably correct in his belief, that he could muster up ammo from nearby units or from other locations, from other from the beachheads, whatever. And at the moment, just for sake of simplicity and consistency, I opted not to allow the player to do this. But after much reflection, I'm sure, maybe I need to do more research. I'm sure those kinds of actions and those kinds of orders, let's call it at the edges, is probably where the magic of Kriegsville happens, right? Where you can make those exceptions because you understand that this would be plausible, this would be feasible. Um, and that's what a commander would do, right? It would find ways to solve a problem in as many creative ways as he or she can.
Right.
So, yeah.
When you say maybe it needs more research, I think you could definitely create an entire lifetime of research just playing Kriegspiel and having players come up with creative ideas, and then you going figuring out how did that actually work in that period. So I had
Hmm.
like pontoons. I always had assumptions about pontoons until a player suggested a use of one, and I was like, actually, I don't really understand how pontoons work in 1870. Then I went and researched it and was like, oh my goodness,
Yes.
look at it, and there's manuals on it. There's actually an entire engineering branch from many countries who studied the problem of pontoons in great detail, and it's all
Hmm.
available for our scholarship, right? So,
And
yeah,
that leads to a really interesting. I don't know if you experienced this too, but sometimes that leads to a bit of an imposter syndrome, um, where, for example, I know some of the players that I umpire for are either ex-military or very knowledgeable about the time period that they're playing in,
right,
and it's always a balance in needing to tell those players that you essentially know more than them, quote unquote.
yeah.
Whereas actually
There's an
their assumption,
implied level of knowledge when you give a resolution, right?
right?
Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. You're telling the player, no, I know that this order wouldn't work in real life because of XYZ reasons. But sometimes you just have to make, those
And the
assumptions.
really skilled player will then come back and re-inject their knowledge in a way that doesn't bark at the umpire.
Right.
Those are the the best players are the ones that actually take and inject their knowledge through continued engagement, curiosity with the umpire, to the umpire at the end says, "Oh, actually, they probably." It's almost. I hesitate to say it with all the conversation about types of games, but there's almost a learning back and forth in the process for the truly like very knowledgeable people. They just enjoy engaging on it. So
Hmm.
it's usually the
Yeah,
person who doesn't know much about it will bark and say, "You're wrong, umpire. I wanted it to work that way. It should have worked." So
exactly.
yeah,
And those are the
yeah,
players I want to cultivate and
yeah,
keep on my, let's say, Rolodeck,
yeah.
um,
Right.
because those
So talk
players are
about
also helping me help them.
how do you recruit players? What's your thoughts about? Do you go recruitment channel and just get whoever comes, or do you have a Rolodex?
Yeah. I do both,
Okay.
and I have to admit I do both. At first, I was always of the philosophy that the more open and the more accepting you are of a game, the better that game will be, because, or at least the better the community will be, because you can then show people the ropes, you can get more people interested, and you just kind of continue growing the community. And I think growing the community is really important to keep this hobby alive and you know
Hmm.
expand its creative potential. On the other hand, I can, from first-hand experience, tell you how different a game can be between two different types of audiences. And
Yeah.
and again, on my notes on doing this in the free time, if I was getting paid for it, I wouldn't mind, right? It would just be a job. But because I'm devoting a lot of my free time into this, I also want to feel like my time, it has a good return on investment, right? And
Yeah.
typically that comes when the players are of the caliber that, like we talked about, are creative, are engaged, are curious, are respected, or are polite, etc.
Yeah. And so, how do you find that balance? So, if you use both methods of injecting new players and having trusted players, we'll call it, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I am going to. It's a shameless plug for my upcoming campaign game.
No, plug away, plug away.
What I'm going to be try doing for my upcoming project is I will essentially not have guaranteed player slots, because I actually think that goes counter to uh, Kriegsspiel principles and at least the Derby House principles. But instead, I want to make sure that I call them my regulars. My regular players know that this project's upcoming, that they know, hey, maybe devote time for this one. Maybe carve out some time on your schedule to play or whatever, well
Yeah,
in advance before I kind of open it up for everyone.
I think
So it's
that's a
a
wise approach because
mhm,
you want to set aside the key because the players are as much a part of making a game work as the umpire.
yeah,
So, putting key players in key positions to drive that forward is a really important part of having a great gaming experience for the new people who don't really understand the period or even how Kriegspiel works, right?
yeah, yeah. What I want to avoid is um, having a contest of seniority, because
Yeah,
it's very often that I see players who are totally new to Kriegsspiel, um, who actually are sometimes even better players or better umpires than people who've been playing for a year, 2, 3 years. Um,
yeah,
so I want to give those new folks an opportunity to shine and to show kind of their interest and curiosity, um, without being exclusive, right?
yeah. So talk about your big project, the masterpiece coming up. You're applying to be a master umpire, which means that master umpire designation in the IKS means a demonstration of skill. So talk about that project and how you conceived it and what was its inspiration.
Yeah, well, the pressure's on, I suppose.
Yeah, right.
It's one of those, you say it, then you build it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I can confidently say that we're building a really excellent scenario here. So the inspiration actually comes from my first kind of big project that I ran, which was the Battle of Jela, which, for all intents and purposes and all accounts, was a incredibly ambitious project, overly ambitious, one would say.
Uh huh.
uh, in terms of player count, in terms of complexity, in terms of just so many moving pieces. Uh, Had
How
a
many
lot of fun.
players did it end up, just to give us a tangible feel for it?
Yeah, I think it was 48 players.
That's a meaty game.
Is a very meaty game,
Yeah.
indeed. And I believe we had about I want to say 16 turns, or maybe even 20 turns.
And how many umpires did you have helping you out?
So that's the very huge benefit. I had a lot of people to help me, and a huge shout out to those folks, because otherwise it would be physically impossible in terms of the time that it would take
Right.
to execute everything. And I'm actually finding that to be quite a rewarding experience, um, because I have now folks that I am working with on my upcoming projects, and also new projects, who are sometimes first time umpires, sometimes folks who never thought they would umpire before,
Right.
who tried something, who helped me with something, either researching a specific part of the conflict or the part of the battle, or just being helpful in any way, uh, who appear to be having fun. Uh,
Yeah. And
so
how do
that for
you
me,
how do you
mhm.
distribute the workload? What's your philosophy on that with the umpires?
Yeah, I tried a lot of different methods. In some ways, you kind of need to just do it as a team. I found,
Mm-hmm.
um, we trialed a bit doing a few kind of assignments. Let's say where, okay, you as an umpire, you're responsible for this part of the battle, or these players, or this dynamic. Let's say logistics or whatever.
Right.
But sometimes what I find with that kind of responsibility, or split responsibility of roles, is that you have a very disjointed experience, and you almost do double the work, because as an umpire, if you're only responsible for a little contained part of the experience, it's very rare that your little part of the experience isn't affected by other things happening elsewhere.
Right.
So you
And
you
knowing the
Mhm.
exact and most entertaining point that your subsystem is going to contribute to the larger game is almost impossible because you don't have the flow of the larger action.
Right.
So if you
Yeah.
have the flow of the larger action, you raise your hand and say, "I think." Or I've just had this experience with my co-umpire Rebel Squirrel. He raised his hand, of course, on Discord, and said, "I think at this point artillery supply becomes an issue." And I hadn't really been thinking that way, and it was
Mhm.
100% right, and it had a huge impact on the overall narratives. But he knew the whole situation. So you really, I think that's a great point. You have to know the whole situation, or your subsystem doesn't. It is double the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and,
yeah.
and I think that's more rewarding for the umpires as well, right? No one wants to
Yeah,
be tasked
yeah. More
with,
interesting for sure, right?
right, yeah, because I think, this is my assumption, a lot of the reason why umpires, at least the ones I work with, enjoy doing these projects is because they get to see the whole narrative unfolded.
Right.
If they're just responsible for a very small part, it almost feels like homework. um,
Yeah, yeah,
which,
yeah.
yeah, once again, we're not getting paid for this, right? So I want to make
Yeah,
sure my
because the
umpires also
payoff
have a
is
good time.
watching the entire interaction, and
Yeah,
and having a subset. It does feel like homework or work, or just less satisfying, right?
yeah,
How do you
yeah.
organize that mechanically? Do you have one umpire channel where everyone congregates, or how do you do that?
Pretty much, yeah.
Hmm.
In my early days, I over engineered this to a point where, ultimately the tools are meant to just help you do things as opposed to force you to do things and be a hindrance. So, I would have different channels, and I would have different, schedules and things, but
Right,
ultimately all we did was just have one umpire chat where we would just discuss things.
right.
And if you need to tag someone or need their help, you would just tag them, and they would, at some point read it. So if it ain't broke, don't fix. I guess is the moral of the story.
And so, what mechanically will an assistant umpire do to help the workload?
Yeah, well, in a sense, I actually, of course, it depends on the level of commitment that assistant umpire can provide. But almost in a sense, I prefer to take a back seat and think myself more as the organizer and kind of like the project manager, let's say,
Hmm.
of the scenario. Uh, and if I feel like the umpire, the assistant umpire, is confident in the rules, is confident in how they would process a turn, I'm totally happy to just let them run with it. Um, I find that, for example, in this upcoming project, the campaign for Luneville, um, one of my assistant umpires, who has been helping me tremendously with a bunch of things, he's super, super interested and intrigued by the specifics of vehicles, the specifics of ranges, and all this kind of more minutia that may not represent, no, might not necessarily represent how we would process a turn.
Yeah.
But I let him run with it because I know it excites him, and I know that it will add a lot of uh, positive experience to the players if that kind of information and that kind of insights are included in the game. So,
Right. And which umpire is that? Just so we can give him a shout
oh
out.
yeah, of course, yeah, I should name them. Charles Potato is the one I'm referencing, but
Charles
I have
Potato.
also, yeah,
So
it's a
Charles
funny name,
Potato
right?
can process beyond your intention if you're a player.
Yes, yes, he can
Good for
actually.
him. We'll
No,
have him
he's
on here and
very
talk.
skillful umpire.
Yeah, we'll have him on here and talk the effective range of an MG34 versus the published range.
Yeah,
There you
right,
go.
exactly.
Right, right.
Yeah, he's the type of umpire to among others I'm working with, Tasty Cools. I don't have a list in front of me, so I don't want to kind of go on a naming
Right, right.
exercise. But they're the kind of umpires that will actually open the source documents, primary sources,
Yeah,
field manuals of the time to actually understand, okay, how did this actually occur in real life for the sake of the hobby? And I find that so cool. And the nerdy part of me is like, yes, I love this, and
right, right.
I want to encourage that.
Terrific. And so you hand the entire turn over to an assistant umpire and they'll process one turn at a time? I know that's one of the ways we do this. Or they'll do just a
Sometimes,
portion sometime.
yeah. Well, I do both live games and play by posts.
Right.
My upcoming project will actually be a combination of both, which I'm quite excited about. Hopefully, it'll
Okay.
work out.
How will you split the live versus play by post action?
Yeah, so the idea is that we'll have a campaign style resolution play by post in the multiple hours kind of time frame and
Yep.
scope. And whenever we feel the Umpire team feel like there's an interesting engagement or a significant engagement in the campaign, the idea is that we'll resolve that over a live game.
Okay.
So we hope that there's a continuation of the players that are in the campaign to actually see and feel invested by their pieces on the map in a live game. And we also hope that will lead to interesting decisions by the players to think, okay, do I commit more to this battle? Do I retreat? Right? Uh, and
Right.
and let give more power to the players to decide how the outcome of the battle should look like, as opposed to
Right.
typically as an umpire we say, okay, well, the game ends here because you guys lost, done.
Where the players making the decision to end the battle or to continue is a much more powerful way to end the scenario because it's based
Yes,
on their own objectives.
exactly, yeah.
How do you balance the campaign players versus the tactical players? And if you don't have an answer, that's a completely valid answer because we were just discussing this on the Discord, and I don't have an answer myself in terms of how do you make sure that if you take 20 players who are in the campaign level who are engaged and then suddenly have a battle with 40 players or a battle with 10 players, how do you balance that?
Yeah, so that I have an inkling of an answer, if that's a valid answer.
Please.
Our inkling, um, which we will be testing, um, of course, in the early parts of the scenario, is that I think there's two things at play actually. Before I give the answer, I suppose the first is that our scenario is quite wide. I don't want to spoil too much, but it'll be rare, unlike a Napoleonic battle where you may have multiple commanders at once in the same spot.
Hmm.
It'll be more likely that the units are more spread out. So I
Right.
think that kind of solves that problem a tiny bit. The second piece is, and I think we'll have to do this regardless, is that the battle should represent whatever way we shape the battle. We can abstract it to represent maybe a larger engagement happening off screen, let's say.
Okay.
So, for example, if we only have, if the battle in theory should have 20 players, 10 on each side, whatever, but we only get to muster, 8 or 10, that's okay. Our proposal is that the outcome of that battle will impact then the 20 players who are involved, and in the abstract way. Still,
That's
still work in
interesting.
progress.
So the campaign players are the fixed amount, and then you can actually telescope the battle to fit the number of players that show up, but it still affects the fixed scope of what you want to achieve at the campaign level. So 10 players could fill the spot of 40 potential players at a battle, but it's you just basically abstract it out and figure out the result basically.
Yeah, that's our proposal, and I think that
That's a good one. I
it's
like that. Yeah.
yeah, I hope it incentivizes players to then also think to themselves, if I don't want to feel frustrated by the result of this battle, I'll make sure I show up.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
or have someone fill in for me, or whatever, right?
How do you
Uh,
solve the? And I'm literally asking this because I don't have the answer. I'm hoping you'll solve it for me.
mm,
Make life easier. How do you solve the role problem? So if you got if the first division is on the march in the campaign level and they've got multiple brigades and regiments, um,
mm.
and then you're in the battle, you need to kind of represent lower. How do you solve that? Were people having the same role they have in the campaign level, or have you thought that through yet?
Yeah, we're actually quite excited, and I've been exchanging some thoughts here with Otovsky, the creator of the rule sets.
Mm-hmm.
What we are excited to test and experiment with is on the campaign level, each player is actually at least a battalion commander. So they are in charge of the more, let's say, strategic matters of executing the war and
Uh
processing the
huh.
war, right? So they're commanding companies, they're commanding more autonomous units than you would maybe typically in a live game where you're a company commander yourself. Um, so the idea is that those battalion commanders may actually be the ones that initiate the battle, or initiate attack, initiate a retreat, the defense, whatever. And they are the ones who actually will be, let's say, the commanders in chief for a live battle. They'll be briefing players on what's happening, what are the objectives, what does this mean in the larger context of the campaign,
Uh huh.
uh, and then we'll just kind of zoom in to those units, those battalions that are engaged with one another, uh, figure out what is the composition of those battalions, and then create roles for those kind of sub units and sub pieces.
And where do you find players for those roles?
That's that's the challenging part.
Yeah,
um,
no, it's something for all of us, right? I think.
yes,
What are your thoughts?
yeah. So the first proposal, which I'm not fully satisfied with yet, uh, is that for players in the campaign game that are maybe far away from this action, we want to continue that fourth wall, right? Not allow them to see the outcomes of that battle.
Right.
Um, the kind of half proposal, or the tentative proposal that we have at the moment, is that if you're close-ish to the battle, where you would maybe receive the report or know the outcome within, let's say, a few hours, you could probably participate. Um, if you're not in the campaign system, then you can participate at any side in the live game. Of course, with your attestation or with your promise that you won't spoil anything for either side.
Right. Right.
But that's the tricky part, right? I mean, for example, at the moment, we are arriving at about 35 players for the campaign system, um, which means for a live game, we need to essentially block out those 35 players from potentially playing in the live games, right? If their units are not involved, which can be a little tricky.
Right. If we had a completely umpire centric universe, we'd have Jane or Joe in their respective cities, and you say you're the Alpha Company commander, you're the Charlie Company commander. You just sit there and wait until we develop a battle.
Right.
But that's overly umpire centric. Poor Jane and Joe want to play, right? So
Yeah.
you've got to figure, we have to figure out how Jane and Joe can participate without spoiling the fog of war, right?
Yeah.
And that's the issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true. I
Yeah, I'm
don't
not.
think
Yeah,
I think the advantage that we have by doing this at a World War II time frame is that it's very unlikely that kind of higher level commanders such as division commanders, battalion commanders, regiment commanders wouldn't be aware of what's happening in other parts of the front. They may be
right,
maybe less confident than reports are getting, but it's not like a Napoleonic campaign where you may have an army that's multiple days or even weeks away marching that you have no idea what's happening, and you won't hear from them for another 3-4 days.
right.
I think we have that bit of an advantage there, but yeah, it's still a challenge that I think we haven't solved yet.
Well, if we go all the way back to your early thought about what was fascinating, seeing that Lynchburg after action review is when you said, look at all the players, that's also the problem. Because when
Yeah.
it really reduces flexibility when, Jane or Joe, we want to entertain them. We want them to be engaged. We want them to enjoy themselves and want them to look up to what we produce as something that when they want to play, they have a great time. But as you create these multi-dimensional not abstracted, multi-dimensional operational level games which have tactical implementations, there are little corners of that battle that mean that Jane and Joe may not get to play, and that's hard to deal with. I don't know if anyone
Hmm.
who's cracked that. I've certainly participated in the live battle portion of campaigns where it's been a pretty limited experience because you don't have any context. You go in and you fight this regiment through it. And we both agree that I'm a terrible player, so maybe that was part of it. And then in the end, the battle just ends, and they say, "Well, now we're going to go back to our operational thing. You can go away."
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, well, "Wait a
Hmm.
minute. I mean, this was a really bad experience, right?" And the response was, "Well, we're playing to a higher order, and we're playing a war here, and we don't have time for your regimental problems, right?" Which was silly because I'm still a player
Yeah.
in a game, right? So you got to. I don't have the answer to this, and my answer was very simple: keep playing tactical games. But now that I've branched into some operational things, I'm considering this, and it's a not trivial problem.
Yeah, it's super hard to solve because
Yeah.
I also, in that equilibrium between realism and playability, right, entertainment,
Right.
I do want to keep a good eye on the entertainment value
Which
because
you cited early on. That was an important part of what the way
hmm
you umpire, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. and
Yeah.
and unfortunately I need to communicate and I need to tell the players that I'm umpiring for and my assistant umpires that sometimes we may need to make some adjustments or some accommodations to make sure everyone's still having a good time.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's a
And so you're
philosophy thing.
doing a campaign with tactical action at the what's the campaign CIC's level? Is that a division or is it
Yes, it's at the division level, indeed.
okay? So you got a division level, and just stop me if we get into any spoiler territory.
No,
So you're
yeah.
at a division level, and then for your masterpiece, you're going to present all of this accumulated stuff together.
Yes, exactly.
And
So
for those
the
umpires who don't know, a masterpiece just simply is a hand raise to say, "This game is going to be a demonstration of the best I can do." And so then master umpires will go look at it and judge it, I guess, but they would just then take a look. They pay more attention to that one versus the other one, and then they would say, "Yeah, you've demonstrated a sufficient skill that we're happy to have you be called a master umpire." So that's kind of how it works. And so that's why we're talking about this in this way. So if you're an umpire who doesn't understand that, I want to give you that background. So you're going to submit this entire body. That's a brave move. I just tell you that. Congratulations. That's right.
I think the lesson for me this year in the Kriegsspiel community is that I always tend to go overly ambitious,
Hey, well,
and I more often than not it kind of works out okay. So I
those
hope
are those of us who have less ambition. Thank you, because on average, we're all pretty ambitious.
there you go.
So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
skew the average up.
yeah, we're delighted that you're ambitious. How do you rehearse? So in order to get all the details right, play testing is one way to say it. Rehearsing might be another way to say it if we look at
Mm.
these games as actually kind of theatrical performances. What how do you play test this game without spoiling it? Because it's complicated, right?
Yep. Well, there's a few things we're doing. The first kind of step we take is to make sure that we spend a lot of time researching and thinking through like scenarios, let's say.
Right.
So even for this campaign, I'm really hyping this campaign up. So I really
Yeah,
hope it'll
fine.
be good enough,
Hype it up. No, it's good.
But for this one, just to give you a little insight, we currently have 60 sources that we've kind of picked out. And when I say source, it can mean a chart, a table, a book, an article, a link,
Oh
kind of
well.
anything. Um, because unlike maybe an early, some earlier projects of mine, I really think this campaign and the conflict we're trying to simulate is really rich, and it has a lot of really interesting mechanics that I think need to be represented to feel satisfying.
Right.
Um, so almost kind of the rules that we're creating from the get go will accommodate for some of that, so that potential scenarios that are unexpected could be potentially solved by all this research we're doing. The second piece is that we're also doing a little bit of live testing. So I actually have a game upcoming this Sunday, meaning August 11th. No, sorry, August 10th, where we'll try to do some testing on kind of the more minutia in terms of capabilities of units, speeds, and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But it's kind of like I think with a lot of Kriegsspiel projects, at least from my experience and some other umpires that I see,
Hmm.
it sometimes can be building the plane as you're flying it.
Yeah. Right. And that's certainly a good analogy for a lot of the work we do because there's ultimately the mechanic that we have in our games is human interaction. So you can't
Mm,
anticipate which mix of players will be inside your system and how they will interact.
exact.
So
Yeah.
there's no way to replicate that specific mixture of players. So they'll always take it in a different direction. But you have to. As long as the mechanics are sound, how when
Mm.
you resolve combat, talk about the lineage of the combat system. Is that from one of these three designers you mentioned earlier, or is it the Autopsy system? Which one is it?
Now it's so I've actually been working closely with Atovsky on developing that system.
A
So I
new
really have
system.
to, uh, let's say, an improvement on the system. So for those who aren't familiar, Atovsky has developed a tactical battle system guide, let's say, rule set for World War II combat.
Hmm.
And he's also developing a campaign system so that you can resolve, operational level conflicts, let's say. So
There
actually,
you
as a
go.
result, a bit of this project of mine, I'm I'm forcing him almost to help
Yeah, yeah.
me kind of develop and to answer some of the questions I have about, hey, how will we resolve, uh, you know, uh, this mechanic or this dynamic, or what about air support? What about communications and supply and
Right.
etc. So,
Horse-drawn logistics versus petrol-driven logistics, all that kind of
oh
good
yeah,
stuff that you find
oh
in
yeah,
World War II. Yeah.
we have it all, folks.
And approximately which dates do you think you'll kick off the project, the actual game?
Yeah, so we are targeting to open applications. So we're doing a player application form
Okay.
this upcoming weekend, so August 9th and 10th, closing that application form by August 23rd, and then beginning in September until we have a resolution, I guess, probably at the end of the year, we'll be playing the game. We're playing the campaign.
We had talked about potentially putting this on on the YouTube, and for a variety of reasons, decided we should probably stay out of promoting individual games on YouTube, all for
Hmm.
the right reasons. But what were you going after when you wanted to promote this a bit? Are you looking for new players? Are you looking for spectators? What would be a great outcome for you?
Uh, Mostly great players. But
Okay,
for me, it's also I want to signal to those who may be interested in participating that hey, this is going to be a game that the Umpire team has put a lot of time and work in creating.
it's great.
And I think that video, I hope, shows a bit. Even though it's just a 2 minute video, shows a bit. It serves as a signal to those players, hopefully, to show them like, hey, this may be an experience you may want to invest time in.
And how did
Because
you make that video? I had a chance to watch it. I actually enjoyed it.
thank
Um,
you.
what short? It's a short trailer video, but it uses historical footage. Where did you get that? Talk just for a second about how you put that together, because I think that was well done.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. It's total ad hoc, MacGyver,
Sure.
um, let's say improvisation. I am not a video editor by any means, so I actually used PowerPoint for the transitions and
Oh, you
for
did. Good for you. Okay, gotcha.
yes,
Yeah,
indeed, indeed.
yeah, yeah.
And
But you have a
and I
lot of
also
video in there. How does that work? Is it embedded in the PowerPoint?
yeah, and so the video then I also was able to because a lot of the video is period footage. So I was able to
Right.
compile it from documentaries and from other um, videos out there that have that footage embedded.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
No, no
Cool.
it was a bit of a a bit of a stressful experience, especially because I'm not super comfortable. Let's say public speaking. I'm a bit shy.
Yeah, you
uh,
came through. You came through fine because it's essentially historical footage with you explaining the upcoming scenario, and so
right.
uh, it it might be accidental. It might be your great skill, but it looked like some of the cuts were perfectly timed with the way you were emphasizing things. So we'll just assume it was skillfully done.
Thank you.
What software did you use to put that together?
Just Clipchamp.
Okay, which is
Yeah.
completely adequate. Clipchamp works great. Yeah.
hmm
Um,
Yeah,
right.
I take the philosophy, and I think we shared this over DMs. I really, for better or for worse, have no qualms with taking something that exists and improving on it and giving it back to the community. And
Yeah.
I'm anti, uh, let's say, double work or needless work. If there's something out there that we can use, and obviously this is a community, right? It's free. We're not doing this for money, so why not?
What are things that you automate in the spirit of that? What are things you think are pretty cut and paste that should remain cut and paste because they're just adequate to do it that way, or just what have you found you've automated?
Hmm, it's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of our work as umpires is hard to automate. um, I remember at the beginning of my umpire career, I had a discussion, even potentially with you or in the Kriegsspiel community.
Uh huh.
Tools like artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, etc., and they are of course helpful um, in structuring your thoughts, especially if you're not a native speaker.
Right.
But oftentimes it can actually be a detriment to your experience because it adds details or it makes assumptions that you don't want the players to get or um, you don't want the player doesn't particularly care about the sound of boots on gravel.
Right.
It just doesn't really add to the experience.
Great point. Right. It doesn't add to the experience, so
Yeah.
you don't need to throw that. And a lot of times, a lot of bandwidth can be consumed by finding these little snippets, like the boots on
hmm
gravel, that don't matter. Right.
yeah, and in some ways I also it's funny, I have a in my current job, I have someone at work who you can very clearly tell uses AI for everything.
Right.
Um, and at certain points, it takes away their credibility. Um, and it makes you feel like, okay, well, if all you're doing is using AI for this experience, why am I participating in it? Um,
Yeah.
that's to say, I'm not a purist where I sometimes I do use the AI to help me think of ways to phrase a report, to phrase a certain moment in the game. But I don't want to give the players the impression that that's all I'm doing, and therefore I'm cheapening the experience somehow.
Great point. Great. That is an excellent way to present it, not cheapening the experience. I used the word automate. I could have chosen a better word, maybe proceduralize. In
Mm,
my one of the things I've stumbled upon is I make all my screenshots using the Mac, and I do the Command Shift 5, and I keep it all
mm,
screenshots the same, and I move the map beneath it. And there's
mm,
just something about doing that very quickly. They cleanly go into my Discord. It's a procedure that I've put in my approach
mm.
that speeds up my resolutions versus the snip tool.
I see.
Because I find it's just faster for me. But that's an example of a personal, organic, non AI procedure that I
Mm,
use to speed up my resolutions, as an example. So,
yeah.
and I think that's the spirit of your earlier comment about excess work. There's ways you could, like Damon, who I will always be forever grateful to Damon for introducing the idea of layer styles, because that means that all of my mountains will
Mm,
look a certain way because I have a layer style that I bring into each map. So,
right,
right.
right.
Um, and so these are the things that size work correctly, so we can focus more on the entertaining aspect of the game.
Yeah. If we have time on that topic,
Sure.
um, one of the interesting pieces that has been hammered into my early umpire career, which I'm really grateful for the umpires who, the more experienced umpires have hammered this into my brain, is the fact of keeping the game going, especially in a live game. Um, it is such a different experience when you are receiving reports one after the other, with an interval of 10 minutes,
Yep.
where you really feel that time pressure and you really feel like probably what a commander would feel like in real life, seeing things unfold before
Mm-hmm.
them, versus getting a report every week or every 2 weeks, in a play by post scenario, or every 30, 40 minutes in a live game. It really takes away that pressure and that stress, which I think is really paramount to the Kriegsspiel experience. So I do everything possible I can to make sure I kind of keep within that 15-minute mark for live games, or that kind of twice a week resolution for play by post games.
Yeah, I think that's right. And those of us who've done in person games or live games via Discord, the tangible thing, the X factor that occurs when you deliver that time pressure to people is amazing,
Yeah.
and people universally come out of that saying, "Wow, that was amazing," because I felt under pressure in a way that's unique, and my decisions were forced, and it's really counterintuitive why people enjoy that, because you'd
Yeah.
think
Right.
we'd all go on vacation to get out of that.
Now
So,
I'm really
right?
looking forward to the day that I can umpire a live game. I know we chatted very briefly, about tools and
Yeah,
resources there.
yeah,
I'm hoping to get a group going kind of at the end of the summer, in September maybe. But
it's great. Yeah,
hard to do
when
that.
you get through this project, which I imagine is absorbing, and it's like game designers talk about play testing, and they say the reason that tabletop simulator is an inferior form of play testing is they can't see the look on people's faces.
Hmm. Yeah,
And so yeah, when you
exactly.
do Kriegspiel in person, you can look at a person's face and tell whether you're delivering that time pressure or not.
Hmm.
And as you walk around, you can see if someone is just the way that they're slouching in their chair. You walk over and give them a report that might get them sitting up straight.
Right.
It's amazing.
See
Once
the
as an
gear
umpire,
spinning.
that's why I think it's as exciting and has the greatest as much potential as anything is that in-person play, because you read a person's physicality and you deliver them a more thrilling experience as a result. If somebody's in the reserve and they're just sitting there on a hill, and every time you come up and say you hear guns in the distance and they just literally just are thrilled, then you say, okay, you're good.
Right.
It's great.
Yeah.
What happens if hundreds of people flock to your game and you have all sorts of extra attention? What do you do with all those extra people who can't actually play, but you still want to entertain in some way? How do you handle that?
Yeah. I'm learning also the hard way
Yeah.
with one of my current projects, being very cautious about scope creep. Yeah, in my upcoming campaign, what we really have to do is just limit the number of players. Um, I hope, I think it'll be a good problem to have lots of players, because then we can redirect them to either other projects of mine or other projects of other empires who are involved, or the live games. Uh, and I think that will also, because we're doing an application form, I hope it'll elevate the level of gameplay and caliber of player, so that everyone involved really is engaged, dedicated, and invested in the game. Doesn't mean you're an experienced Kriegsspieler. You can be a total newcomer, and in
Yeah.
the application form we stress that you don't have to have any prior experience, but you do need to be engaged and invested, especially because you're going to have 34 other players who are also putting in that time commitment and that kind of energy commitment.
Yeah. Fair enough.
So yeah,
Joseph
quite
Little,
excited.
it was an absolute pleasure to have you on talking about your masterpiece coming up. I hope that the audience for this specific chat show, being umpires, will have a lot of them come in and certainly at least spectate, offer to help, and then of course play. We fascinating conversation. I really, your some of your ideas are much more advanced than you claim your level of experience would bound you to. So you're really doing great work, and I look forward to seeing this masterpiece coming up.
Awesome. Really appreciate it. I hope in a few months from now I can look back at this conversation and be proud that the
There
things
you
I'm
go.
promising did come to fruition. So
I think
thank
there's
you.
a high likelihood you will be. We'll talk to you soon, man.
All right. Thank you so much.